The shotgun blast echoed through Redstone Valley as Clara Whitfield stood over the fallen outlaw, her twisted leg trembling, but her aim true. They'd mocked her limp when she'd stepped off that stagecoach 3 days ago, called her a broken mail-order bride no man would want. Now, with blood pooling at her feet and the town's most feared gang leader dying in the dust, Clara proved that sometimes the most damaged souls fight the fiercest battles. Stay with me to discover how a limping woman and a one-legged rancher brought an entire town back from the edge of darkness, and comment below which city you're watching from so I can see how far Clara's story has traveled. The autumn wind carried the scent of sage and desperation through Redstone Valley, as Clara Whitfield pressed her face against the stagecoach window, watching the landscape blur past in shades of rust and gold. Her fingers traced the worn edges of the letter in her lap, the 15th she'd received from Samuel Morrison, each one filled with promises of a new life far from the Pittsburgh factory, where she'd spent the last 8 years hiding her limp behind long skirts and careful steps. "Redstone ahead!" the driver bellowed, jolting Clara from her thoughts. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the mining town materialized from the dust like a mirage she'd been chasing for months. Wooden buildings leaned against each other like drunken companions, their facades weathered by wind and neglect. The main street stretched before them, rutted and unforgiving, populated by men who looked as hard as the mountains surrounding them. Clara adjusted her traveling dress, a deep burgundy that had cost her 3 months' wages, and checked that her shawl adequately covered the leather brace supporting her left leg. The injury from the factory accident 4 years ago had left her with more than just a limp. It had branded her as damaged goods in a world that had little use for broken women. "This your stop, miss?" The driver's gruff voice pulled her back to the present. "Yes," she managed, her throat dry as desert sand. The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of what appeared to be the town's only hotel, a 2-story structure that had seen better decades. Clara gathered her courage along with her carpet bag, the sum total of her worldly possessions fitting easily in the worn fabric case. The driver helped her down, his grip firm but impersonal. The moment her feet touched the ground, her left leg buckled slightly, causing her to stumble. She caught herself on the coach's wheel, but not before several passers-by noticed. "Well, well," a woman's voice drawled from the hotel's porch. "Looks like someone ordered themselves a lame mare." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks, but she straightened her spine and lifted her chin. She'd heard worse in Pittsburgh, endured the whispers and pointing fingers every day since the accident. At least here, she thought, she had Samuel's love to shield her. "Ma'am," she addressed the woman, a painted lady whose rouge couldn't hide the hard lines life had etched into her face. "I'm looking for Samuel Morrison. He was supposed to meet me." The woman's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Samuel Morrison? Honey, you're about 3 months too late for that reunion." The world tilted. Clara gripped her carpetbag tighter, the leather handle cutting into her palm. "What do you mean?" "Dead. Caught in a flash flood up at Devil's Creek back in June. Him and 2 other fellows swept away like they were nothing more than twigs." The woman's voice softened slightly, perhaps recognizing the devastation spreading across Clara's face. "You really didn't know?" Clara's knees threatened to give way, and this time it had nothing to do with her damaged leg. 3 months. Samuel had been dead for 3 months while she'd been planning their life together, sewing her wedding dress by candlelight, practicing how she'd tell him about her injury in person because she'd been too cowardly to put it in her letters. "I need to sit down," she whispered. "Saloon's across the street," the woman offered, gesturing toward a building that seemed to pulse with noise and life even in the afternoon sun. "Mickey'll pour you something to steady your nerves. First drinks on the house for ladies new to town, especially ones who just got their hearts broken." Clara wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain some semblance of dignity, but where else could she go? She had exactly $17 to her name, no return ticket, and no one waiting for her in a town that already saw her as a curiosity at best, a joke at worst. The walk across the street felt like miles. Each step drew stares, and she could hear the whispers starting up like crickets at dusk. "Look at that limp. Morrison's mail-order bride, I'll bet. Poor thing doesn't even know he's dead. What's she gonna do now? No decent man's going to want—" Clara pushed through the saloon's swinging doors before she could hear the end of that sentence. The interior was dim and smoky, filled with the mingled scents of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed men. Conversation stuttered to a halt as she entered, all eyes turning to assess the newcomer. "You must be Clara." The voice came from a corner table, deep and measured. Clara turned to see a man rising from his seat, his movement awkward but purposeful. As he stepped into the light, she saw why. His left leg was wooden from the knee down, the carved oak polished smooth from use. "How did you know my name?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Samuel was my partner, Colton Reeves." He extended a calloused hand, and she noticed the way he balanced his weight, compensating for his missing limb with the same practiced ease she'd developed for her own disability. "He talked about you constantly. Read your letters aloud so many times I could probably recite them myself." Fresh grief washed over her. "He's really gone?" "I'm afraid so." Colton's dark eyes held a sympathy that seemed genuine. "I tried to write you, but I didn't have your address. Samuel kept that information close, said he didn't want any other fellow trying to steal you away." "Steal me?" Clara laughed bitterly. "A limping factory girl with no family and $17 to her name? What a prize." "Don't." The sharpness in his tone surprised her. "Don't do that to yourself. Samuel saw something in you worth crossing half the country for. Those letters of yours gave him hope when this place was trying its damnedest to beat it out of him." Colton pulled out a chair for her, and she sank into it gratefully. He signaled the bartender, who brought over a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses without being asked. "I don't drink," Clara protested. "Today you do." He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into each glass. "To Samuel Morrison, who was too good for this valley but loved it anyway." Clara lifted the glass with trembling fingers and touched it to his. The whiskey burned, but it was a cleaner pain than the ache in her chest. "What am I going to do?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "I can't go back." "There's nothing for me there. But here. Here, you survived like the rest of us." Colton studied her with those dark eyes that seemed to see past her careful facade. "Samuel left you something. I was supposed to give it to you when you arrived, though I'd hoped it would be under happier circumstances." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. Inside was a gold locket, simple but elegant, and a folded piece of paper. Clara opened the locket first. Inside was a tiny photograph of Samuel, his smile exactly as she'd imagined it from his letters. The paper was harder to unfold, her fingers shaking as she recognized his handwriting. "My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, then Colton's had to do the hardest thing I ever asked of him. I'm gone, and you're alone in a place that probably seems as foreign as the moon. I'm sorry for that, sorrier than words can express. But I need you to know something. You mattered. Every letter you sent, every story you shared, every dream we built together in those pages mattered more than all the gold in these mountains. You gave me something to fight for when the days were dark and the nights were darker. Colton will look after you if you'll let him. He's the best man I've ever known, even if he'd rather shoot himself in his good foot than admit it. The ranch is half his now, but I've left provisions for you. You won't be destitute, I promise you that. Be brave, my Clara. You crossed an ocean of land to find love, and though I can't give you mine in person, know that it existed, fierce and true, right up until my last breath. Forever yours, Samuel." The letter blurred as tears finally came, silent and steady. Around her, the saloon had returned to its normal rhythm, the novelty of her presence already fading. But Colton remained still, patient, a solid presence in a world that had suddenly become uncertain. "The ranch," she finally managed. He mentioned a ranch. "About 5 miles north of town. Good land, decent cattle, and more problems than you can shake a stick at." Colton refilled her glass. "The Morrison place has been a target lately. Gideon Davenport and his gang have been pressing folks to sell, and they don't take kindly to refusal." Samuel refused? Every damn time. Said he was building something for his bride, and no amount of threats would make him give it up. Colton's jaw tightened. "I think that's what got him killed, though I can't prove it. That flash flood was suspicious. The weather had been clear for weeks." Clara processed this information, anger beginning to mix with her grief. "You think they murdered him?"
I think Gideon Davenport doesn't leave much to chance. And now that Samuel's gone, they've been circling the ranch like vultures. I've been holding them off, but one man with one leg isn't much of a deterrent. 2, Clara corrected quietly. Pardon. She pushed back her shawl, revealing the brace on her left leg. One woman with one good leg. We'd make a matched set. For the first time since she'd met him, Colton smiled, a quick flash that transformed his weathered features. Samuel always did say you had steel in your spine. Question is, what do you want to do about it? Clara looked around the saloon, at the faces already dismissing her as another tragic story in a town full of them. She thought about the factory in Pittsburgh, the gray walls and the grinding machinery that had taken her mobility and her faith in fairness. She thought about Samuel, who'd seen past her injury to the woman beneath, who'd died trying to build something beautiful in this harsh land. I want to see the ranch, she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. I came here to start a new life, and that's what I intend to do. It's dangerous, Colton warned. Davenport's not the type to let a limping woman stand in his way. Then he'll learn what the factory owners in Pittsburgh learned. Limping women can be the most dangerous kind. We've already survived what was meant to break us. Colton studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. We'll head out at first light. Tonight you'll stay at the hotel. Martha runs a clean place, and she'll give you a fair rate if you tell her you're with me. With you? Business partners. Samuel left you his half of the ranch, which makes us partners whether we planned it or not. He stood, his wooden leg clicking against the floor. I'll warn you now, I'm not an easy man to work with. I'm stubborn, set in my ways, and I've got no patience for foolishness. Good, Clara replied, rising to meet his gaze. Neither do I. They shook hands again, this time sealing a partnership neither had expected. As Clara turned to leave, a group of men near the bar snickered. Cripple in the gimp, one muttered. What a pair they'll make. Colton's hand moved to his holster, but Clara touched his arm lightly. Don't. They're not worth the bullet. Samuel was right about you, he said quietly as they walked toward the door. You do have steel in your spine. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, painting Redstone in shades of amber and shadow. Clara stood on the wooden sidewalk, looking at the town that was supposed to have been her salvation. It was rougher than she'd imagined, meaner, more broken. But then again, so was she. Miss Whitfield, Colton said formally, touching the brim of his hat. I'll collect you at dawn. Bring whatever you can carry on horseback. I don't ride, she admitted. The leg. Then you'll learn. Out here, everybody rides, walks, or dies. Those are the only 3 options. His tone wasn't unkind, just matter of fact. Samuel's horse is at the ranch, a gentle mare named Buttercup. She'll teach you what you need to know. As Colton walked away, his gait rolling but determined, Clara realized she'd crossed more than just physical distance to reach Redstone. She'd crossed into a world where her disability might not be a liability, but simply another fact of existence, like the dust and the danger and the dreams that drove people to these forsaken places. Martha at the hotel was indeed fair, offering Clara a small but clean room for 50 cents a night. Heard about Samuel, the older woman said without preamble. Shame that. He was one of the good ones. So everyone says, because it's true. This town chews up good men and spits out their bones. The fact that Colton survived this long is nothing short of a miracle. Martha handed her a key. Rooms at the top of the stairs, last door on the right. Supper's at 6 if you're hungry. Nothing fancy, but it'll fill your belly. Clara climbed the stairs slowly, each step a reminder of her limitations. But when she reached her room and looked out the window at the vast expanse of valley stretching toward the mountains, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Possibility. She unpacked her few belongings. 2 dresses, undergarments, her mother's Bible, a photograph of her parents taken before the fever claimed them, and the half-finished wedding dress she'd been sewing. The white fabric seemed to mock her now, all those tiny stitches representing hopes that had died with Samuel. A knock at the door interrupted her melancholy. Martha stood in the hallway with a tray of food. Thought you might prefer to eat in private tonight. Town's buzzing about you and not all of its kind. Let them buzz, Clara said, accepting the tray gratefully. What are they saying? The usual trash. That you're a gold digger who came for Samuel's land, that Colton's a fool for taking you in, that you'll be dead or gone within a week. Martha's weathered face softened. But I've been in this town for 20 years, and I've learned to spot survivors. You've got the look. What look is that? Like you've already been through hell and figured out it's not as scary as everyone makes it out to be. Martha patted her shoulder. Eat up, get some rest. Dawn comes early in Redstone, and from what I hear, you've got a hard ride ahead. The meal was simple, beans, cornbread, and a tough piece of beef, but Clara ate every bite. Outside, she could hear the town coming alive for the evening, the saloon's piano starting up, voices rising in laughter and argument. Somewhere out there, Gideon Davenport and his gang were planning their next move. Somewhere out there, Samuel's grave waited under the vast western sky. She pulled out paper and ink from her carpet bag, intending to write to her former roommate in Pittsburgh, to let someone know she'd arrived safely. But what could she say? That the man she'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry was dead? That she was now business partners with a one-legged rancher she'd just met? That despite everything, she felt more alive than she had in years? Instead, she wrote, Dear Margaret, I have arrived in Redstone. It is nothing like I expected and everything I needed. I am learning that broken things can still be strong, and that courage sometimes means simply refusing to run when everyone expects you to. I will write more when I can. Your friend, Clara. As night settled over Redstone, Clara prepared for bed in a room that smelled of sage and possibility. Tomorrow, she would learn to ride a horse despite her damaged leg. Tomorrow, she would see the ranch Samuel had died protecting. Tomorrow, she would begin to understand what it meant to fight for something in a place where the law was often just a suggestion and strength came in unexpected forms. She thought about Colton Reeves, the way he moved through the world with his wooden leg like it was a badge of honor rather than a mark of shame. She thought about how he'd looked at her, not with pity or disgust, but with a kind of recognition, as if he saw in her a kindred spirit. The moon rose full and bright over Redstone Valley, casting shadows that looked like reaching fingers across her floor. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and others answered, their voices creating a symphony of wildness that both thrilled and terrified her. Clara touched the locket at her throat, feeling the weight of Samuel's love and expectations. He'd believed she was brave enough for this life, strong enough to carve out a place in this unforgiving land. She'd traveled 2,000 miles on that faith, and now it was all she had left. I'll try, she whispered to his photograph. I'll try to be the woman you believed I could be. Dawn came too soon, and not soon enough. Clara dressed in her plainest dress, a brown wool that wouldn't show trail dust, and pinned her hair back severely. She wrapped her leg brace tighter than usual, knowing she'd need all the support she could get for whatever lay ahead. Colton was waiting outside the hotel as promised, holding the reins of 2 horses. One was a sturdy bay gelding that looked like it could carry a full-grown tree without complaint. The other was a spotted mare with gentle eyes and a patient demeanor. Buttercup, he said simply, nodding toward the mare. She was Samuel's gift to you. Picked her out special, said she had the temperament for a new rider. Clara approached the horse carefully, her hand extended. Buttercup sniffed her fingers, then nudged her palm, looking for treats. She likes you, Colton observed. That's good. A horse that doesn't like its rider is just a disaster waiting to happen. How do I? Clara gestured helplessly at the saddle. Same way I do, carefully and with a complete disregard for dignity. He demonstrated, grabbing the saddle horn and swinging his wooden leg over with practiced ease. Your turn. It took 3 tries and considerable assistance, but Clara finally managed to mount Buttercup. The position felt precarious, her damaged leg protesting the unfamiliar angle, but the mare stood perfectly still, as if understanding her rider's limitations. We'll go slow, Colton promised. The ranch is 5 miles, but we'll take the easy trail. Should have you there before the sun gets too high. They rode out of Redstone as the town was just beginning to wake. A few early risers watched them go, and Clara heard someone mutter about dead man's property as they passed. She kept her eyes forward, focusing on matching Colton's rhythm, on learning to move with the horse rather than against it. The trail wound through stands of pine and aspen, their leaves just beginning to turn gold with autumn's touch.
Colton pointed out landmarks as they rode. That's Wheeler's Creek, good fishing if you've got the patience. Those rocks mark the boundary between Morrison Land and Henderson's Spread. And that, he gestured toward a dark smudge in the distance, is Devil's Creek, where Samuel died. Clara studied the innocent-looking stream bed, dry now but showing signs of violent water damage along its banks. You really think it wasn't an accident? I think Gideon Davenport's got this whole valley under his thumb, and anyone who stands up to him tends to meet unfortunate ends. Colton's voice was grim. Sheriff's either bought or scared, maybe both. The good people keep their heads down and hope the evil passes them by. And you? I keep my gun loaded and sleep with one eye open. He glanced back at her. That's the life you're choosing, Miss Whitfield. It's not too late to turn around. It was too late the moment I stepped on that train in Pittsburgh, Clara replied. I've got nowhere else to go and nothing else to lose. You've got your life. That's not living, Mr. Reeves. That's just existing. I did that for 4 years after my accident, hiding in the shadows, accepting scraps of kindness like they were feasts. Samuel's letters made me believe I could have more. Even if he's gone, I won't dishonor that belief by running at the first sign of trouble. They crested a rise, and Colton pulled his horse to a stop. Then welcome to your new home, Miss Whitfield. The ranch spread out below them like something from a dream. A modest but sturdy cabin sat in a grove of cottonwoods, smoke rising from its chimney. A barn and corral held a small herd of cattle, their brown and white hides glossy in the morning sun. A vegetable garden showed signs of recent tending, and a creek ran clear and bright along the property's eastern edge. It's beautiful, Clara breathed. It's vulnerable, Colton corrected. Too much open ground, not enough defensive positions. Samuel always saw the beauty. I've always seen the weaknesses. As they descended toward the cabin, Clara noticed fresh horse tracks in the dust. Too many for just one man's comings and goings. Company? She asked. Colton's hand moved to his rifle. Looks like. Stay close, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? No. He turned in his saddle to stare at her. No? I don't run, Mr. Reeves. Not anymore. If there's trouble at my ranch, I face it. Your ranch, he repeated, something like admiration in his voice. Samuel was right. You do have steel in your spine. They approached the cabin cautiously, but the door opened before they reached it. A man stepped out, tall and lean, with the kind of good looks that had probably opened a lot of doors in his life. His clothes were too fine for ranch work, his boots polished to a shine that seemed almost insulting in this landscape of dust and struggle. Colton, the man said pleasantly, as if they were old friends meeting for coffee. And this must be the famous Miss Whitfield. Gideon Davenport, at your service. He swept his hat off in an exaggerated bow, and Clara saw the mockery in it, the way his eyes lingered on her mounted position, calculating how difficult it would be for her to dismount with dignity. Mr. Davenport, she said coolly, making no move to get down from Buttercup, to what do we owe the pleasure? Just a neighborly visit to welcome you to Redstone Valley, and to make you an offer you'd be foolish to refuse. His smile was all teeth, no warmth. $10,000 for this ranch, cash on delivery. That's enough to set you up comfortable anywhere you'd like to go. San Francisco, Denver, even back east if that's your pleasure. The ranch isn't for sale, Clara said firmly. Everything's for sale, Miss Whitfield. It's just a matter of price. Davenport's eyes hardened. Samuel learned that lesson too late. I'd hate for you to make the same mistake. Is that a threat? Colton's voice was deadly quiet. It's a kindness, Davenport replied smoothly. This valley's no place for a crippled woman trying to play rancher. The work's hard, the winters are brutal, and accidents. He spread his hands. Well, accidents happen all the time out here. Just ask Samuel. Clara felt rage rise in her throat like bile. This man, this smooth-talking killer, stood on Samuel's land and practically admitted to murdering him. Her hands tightened on the reins until Buttercup shifted nervously. Get off my property, she said, her voice carrying a strength that surprised everyone, including herself. Get off, and don't come back unless you're prepared to face the consequences. Davenport laughed, a sound like ice breaking. Your property? Little girl, you don't even know what you own. This ranch has silver deposits that could make a man rich beyond imagining. Samuel was too stupid to see it, too focused on his cattle and his romantic notions. But I'm not, and neither are the men who back me. Then you should have made Samuel a better offer while he was alive, Clara shot back. But you didn't, did you? Because you thought you could just take it once he was gone. Well, Mr. Davenport, you thought wrong. She swung down from Buttercup, ignoring the sharp pain in her leg as she hit the ground. She walked toward him, her limp pronounced but her bearing proud. I've worked in factories where men like you treated workers like disposable parts. I've seen what happens when greed runs unchecked, and I've survived things that would have broken someone twice as strong as you pretend to be. She stopped just out of his reach, close enough that he could see the determination in her eyes. This ranch stays with me, and if you or your men set foot on it again without invitation, I'll shoot first and let God sort out the righteousness of it later. Davenport's facade cracked slightly, revealing the cruel man beneath. You're making a mistake, Miss Whitfield. I own this valley, the sheriff, the bank, most of the businesses. You'll find life very difficult without my goodwill. Then I'll find it difficult, she replied. But I'll find it on my own terms, on my own land, with my own conscience clean. He looked between her and Colton, calculation in his eyes. You think this broken-down soldier can protect you? He couldn't even protect Samuel. Colton dismounted, his wooden leg hitting the ground with a solid thunk. I wasn't here when Samuel died, but I'm here now. And if you're threatening Miss Whitfield, then you're threatening me too. A cripple defending a gimp, Davenport mused. How poetic, how utterly pointless. He walked back to his horse, a magnificent black stallion that probably cost more than most people in Redstone saw in a year. As he mounted, he looked back at them with a smile that promised nothing good. Enjoy your ranch, Miss Whitfield, for as long as it lasts. He spurred his horse and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust that seemed to hang in the air like a threat. Clara's legs gave out then, the adrenaline leaving her system all at once. Colton caught her before she hit the ground, his grip surprisingly gentle. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen, he said, helping her to the porch steps. Can it be both? She laughed shakily. Did I really just threaten to shoot Gideon Davenport? You did, and he'll make you pay for it, one way or another. Colton sat beside her, his wooden legs stretched out straight. But damn if it wasn't something to see. Samuel would have been proud. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the dust settle where Davenport had disappeared. The ranch around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would come next. Tell me about the silver, Clara finally said. Samuel never believed it was there, said it was just another tall tale to make men crazy. Colton rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. But Davenport's not the type to chase fantasies. If he says there's silver, there probably is. Then why didn't Samuel mine it? Because he wanted to ranch. Said there was something clean about raising cattle, something honest. Mining turns men into monsters, he always said. Look what it's done to Redstone. Clara considered this, thinking about the man she'd come to love through letters, the principles he'd held even when they might have cost him everything. They had cost him everything in the end. We're not selling, she said firmly. Not to Davenport, not to anyone. This ranch stays what Samuel wanted it to be. That's a fine sentiment, but sentiment doesn't stop bullets. Colton stood, offering her his hand. Come on, let me show you the house. Then we need to talk about defenses. The cabin was simple but clean, with touches that showed Samuel had been preparing for her arrival. Curtains on the windows, a rocking chair by the fireplace, even a vase on the table waiting for wildflowers. Clara touched each item reverently, seeing the hope embedded in these small domesticities. He was so excited, Colton said quietly. Spent weeks making everything perfect. Said you deserved to walk into a home, not just a house. Tears threatened again, but Clara forced them back. There would be time for grief later. Now she needed to be strong. Where do I sleep? She asked practically. Samuel's room is through there. Mine's in the barn, converted the loft when we became partners. Gives us both privacy. He hesitated.
Unless you'd prefer I stay closer, given the circumstances. The barn is fine. We're business partners, Mr. Reeves, not anything else. Agreed. Though, given what just happened, you might want to start calling me Colton. If we're going to fight together, we should at least be on first-name basis. Clara, then. She extended her hand and they shook formally. Now, about those defenses you mentioned? They spent the rest of the morning walking the property, Colton pointing out vulnerable spots and strategic positions. Clara's leg ached fiercely, but she didn't complain, mentally cataloging everything he told her. We need more men, Colton concluded. 2 people can't hold this place against Davenport's gang. How many does he have? At least a dozen, maybe more. Hired guns mostly, men with no loyalty except to gold. He gestured toward the town. There are good people in Redstone, people who hate what Davenport's done to the valley. But they're scared. Then we need to give them something to be brave about, Clara said, an idea forming. What if we hired some hands? Not fighters, just regular ranch hands. Show that we're not afraid, that we're planning to stay and work this land properly. With what money? Ranch is barely breaking even as it is. Clara smiled for the first time since arriving in Redstone. With the $17 in my pocket and whatever credit Samuel's good name might still carry. It's not much, but it's a start. Colton studied her with those dark eyes that seemed to weigh every word. You're serious about this? Dead serious, Clara replied, then winced at her choice of words. We can't just sit here waiting for Davenport to make his next move. We need to show this town that someone's willing to stand up. That afternoon, they rode back into Redstone together, Clara's confidence on horseback growing with each mile. The town seemed different now that she knew its secret. Beneath the rough exterior and apparent lawlessness, fear ran through every interaction like an underground river. She saw it in the way people averted their eyes when Davenport's men passed, in the nervous laughter that followed their jokes, in the careful distance everyone maintained from anyone associated with the gang. They stopped first at Henderson's general store. The proprietor, a thin man with nervous hands, almost dropped a jar of preserves when they walked in. Miss Whitfield, he stammered, heard you met Gideon this morning. News travels fast, Clara observed, running her fingers along a bolt of fabric. Tell me, Mr. Henderson, did Samuel have credit here? Henderson glanced toward the window as if expecting Davenport to materialize. He did, but then I'd like to continue that arrangement. The ranch needs supplies, and I need to hire hands. Any men in town looking for honest work? Honest work can get a man killed around here, Henderson said quietly. So can dishonest work, Clara countered. At least with honest work, a man can sleep with a clear conscience. Henderson studied her for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. Tom Martinez has been looking for work since Davenport's men burned out his small place. Good with cattle, better with horses. And the Brennan brothers, Irish boys, hard workers, when they're sober. When are they sober? Colton asked dryly. When they're working, Henderson admitted. Samuel hired them for Roundup last year. They did right by him. Clara nodded. Where would I find these men? This time of day? Probably at the church. Father Miguel runs a soup kitchen for folks down on their luck. Henderson hesitated, then added, Be careful, Miss Whitfield. Davenport doesn't like people upsetting his arrangements. His arrangements have already upset me, Clara replied. I'm simply returning the favor. They left the store with Henderson's promise to extend credit for basic supplies, though Clara could see the fear in his eyes as he agreed. The church was a small adobe building at the edge of town, its bell tower leaning slightly as if bent by the constant wind. Father Miguel, a round man with kind eyes and work-worn hands, greeted them at the door. Miss Whitfield, I heard of your loss. Samuel was a good man, one of the few who still tithed regularly. He looked at Colton with less warmth. Mr. Reeves. Father, Colton nodded stiffly. Clara sensed history there, but now wasn't the time to explore it. We're looking for Tom Martinez and the Brennan brothers, Clara explained. I need hands for the ranch. Father Miguel's expression grew worried. You're sure that's wise? After this morning convinced me I need good men around me, Clara interrupted. Will you introduce us? The 3 men were indeed in the church's small kitchen, sharing a pot of thin stew.
Tom Martinez was older than Clara expected, perhaps 40, with silver threading through his black hair and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of recent hardship. The Brennan brothers, Sean and Patrick, were younger, red-headed, and freckled, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested they weren't comfortable with charity. "I need ranch hands," Clara said without preamble. "The work's hard, the pay's modest, and there's a good chance Davenport will cause trouble for anyone who signs on with me. But it's honest work, and I'll treat you fair." Tom Martinez set down his spoon slowly. "Davenport's men killed my milk cow, poisoned my well, and burned my cabin because I wouldn't sell to him. You offering me a chance to fight back?" "I'm offering you a chance to work," Clara corrected. "Fighting may come with it, but that's not the purpose. The purpose is to run a ranch the way Samuel Morrison intended, with dignity and honesty." "How much?" Sean Brennan asked practically. "$1 a day plus food and a dry place to sleep. $2 if there's trouble." Patrick Brennan laughed bitterly. "Lady, there's always trouble when Davenport's involved." "Then you'll make $2, Clara said simply. "Do we have a deal?" The three men exchanged glances. It was Tom who spoke for them. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow morning. Can you make it to the ranch by sunrise?" "We'll be there," Tom promised. He stood and extended his hand. Clara shook it, noting the calluses that proved his claim to be a working man. As they left the church, Father Miguel blessed them quietly. "You're doing a dangerous thing, Miss Whitfield." "I'm doing the right thing, Father." Sometimes they're the same. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they crested the final ridge, Clara saw smoke rising from the cabin's chimney. Too much smoke. "Fire!" she gasped, spurring Buttercup forward. But Colton caught her reins. "Wait!" "Look closer." The smoke was coming from the chimney, but also from several spots around the property. As they drew nearer, Clara could see why. Someone had left burning bundles of sage and other materials at strategic points around the ranch boundaries. "Warning shots," Colton said grimly. "Davenport's way of saying he can reach us whenever he wants." They found more signs of the intrusion. Gates left open, water barrels overturned, and most disturbing of all, a dead rattlesnake nailed to the barn door with a note. Snakes have a way of finding their holes. Clara pulled the snake down with surprising steadiness, throwing it into one of the still-burning sage bundles. "If he thinks this will scare me off, he doesn't know much about factory girls. I've seen worse intimidation from floor supervisors." That evening, as they prepared a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, Clara asked Colton about his history with Father Miguel. "Notice that, did you?" Colton pushed his food around his plate. "Father Miguel thinks I should forgive the man who cost me my leg. Says holding on to hate is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die." "Who was it?" "Confederate cavalry officer during the war. We'd already surrendered, but he wanted to make an example, shot 3 of us in the legs, left us to die or live as cripples. His way of ensuring we'd never fight again." Colton's voice was flat, emotionless. "He was right about that part." "I'm sorry," Clara said quietly. "Don't be. If I hadn't lost my leg, I never would have come west, never would have met Samuel, never would have found this place." He looked at her directly. "Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us to where we need to be." Clara thought about the factory accident, the grinding gears that had crushed her leg and her old life in the same terrible moment. Without it, she never would have answered Samuel's advertisement, never would have found the courage to travel 2,000 miles to a place she'd only seen in her dreams. "Tell me about Samuel," she said. "Not the rancher or the partner, but the man. What made him laugh? What made him angry? What did he do on quiet evenings?" Colton leaned back, a genuine smile crossing his weathered features. "He loved terrible jokes. The worse they were, the more he'd laugh. Used to collect them like some men collect stamps. And he'd sing. Lord, could that man sing? Hymns mostly, but sometimes songs his mother taught him. He'd sit on that very porch in the evenings, watching the sunset, planning all the things he'd do when you arrived." "What kind of plans?" "He was going to teach you to ride, of course. Said you'd probably be scared at first, but that you had the kind of courage that just needed the right encouragement. He wanted to show you the high meadow where wildflowers bloom in spring. Said it would remind you that beautiful things could grow even in hard soil. He planned to build a bigger cabin, with a proper kitchen and maybe even a piano if he could find one. Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but didn't wipe them away. A piano? You mentioned in one of your letters that you used to play before the accident made it difficult. He spent weeks trying to figure out how to modify a piano bench to accommodate your leg. Colton's voice grew rough. He loved you, Miss Whitfield. Clara, truly and completely loved you without ever setting eyes on you. How is that possible? Because he saw your soul in those letters. Your humor when you described the factory gossip, your compassion when you wrote about the younger girls who struggled with the work, your strength when you mentioned your injury only in passing, never dwelling on it or seeking pity. Colton stood abruptly. I should check the perimeter before full dark. Clara watched him go, understanding his need for solitude. Grief was a private thing out here, she was learning, something to be wrestled with alone rather than shared. That night, she lay in Samuel's bed, surrounded by the small touches he'd added for her comfort. A quilt that looked handmade, probably purchased at dear cost from someone in town. A small shelf he'd built beside the bed, just the right height for a water glass and a book. Even a footstool positioned where it would help her manage her leg when rising in the morning. She pulled out his letters, reading them by candlelight with new understanding. Every word took on deeper meaning now that she'd seen the land he described, met the people he mentioned, faced the challenges he'd tried to shield her from. A sound outside made her freeze. Footsteps, deliberate and heavy, circled the cabin. Clara reached for the shotgun Colton had left beside the bed, checking that it was loaded. The footsteps stopped at her window. Pretty thing like you shouldn't be alone, a voice drawled. Dangerous country for a woman with a bad leg. Clara recognized the voice, one of Davenport's men from the saloon. She cocked the shotgun loudly, making sure he heard it. I'm not alone, she called back. And this shotgun doesn't care about my leg. The man laughed. Colton can't protect you forever, girlie. Sooner or later, you'll be alone, and then we'll have a proper conversation about your future. Is that a threat? It's a promise. The footsteps moved away, but his parting words drifted back. Sweet dreams, little cripple. Clara stayed awake the rest of the night, the shotgun across her lap, watching shadows move across the walls. When Colton knocked at dawn, she was already dressed and ready. Heard you had a visitor, he said, noting the circles under her eyes. Just someone testing our defenses. She didn't mention the slur, the way it had burrowed under her skin like a splinter. The new hands should be here soon. They arrived as promised, Tom Martinez leading the way on a borrowed mule, the Brennan brothers walking beside him. They looked rough in the morning light, men who'd been broken down and were trying to rebuild themselves. Where do we start? Tom asked simply. Colton set them to work immediately, checking fences, moving cattle to better grazing, reinforcing the barn doors. Clara watched them work, noting how they fell into easy rhythm despite being strangers to each other. Hard work was a universal language out here. Around midday, another rider approached. Clara tensed, but Tom called out, "It's just Anna!" The rider was a woman, perhaps 30, with Mexican features and intelligent eyes. She dismounted gracefully, carrying a basket. "Thought you men might need a proper meal," she said, then noticed Clara. "You must be Miss Whitfield. I'm Anna Martinez, Tom's wife." "I thought Henderson said your place was burned out." "It was. We're staying with my cousin in town, but—" Anna's face hardened. "But I won't let Gideon Davenport turn me into a ghost. If Tom's working here, then I'm helping too." The basket contained tortillas still warm from the griddle, beans seasoned with peppers, and a jar of salsa that made the Brennan brothers' eyes water. They ate gratefully, and Clara noticed how the simple act of sharing food seemed to bond them. "We could use a woman's touch around here," Clara ventured. "I can't pay much, but—" "You're giving Tom work when no one else will," Anna interrupted. "That's payment enough. Besides," she smiled slyly, "someone needs to teach you to cook something besides beans and cornbread." That afternoon, while the men worked, Anna helped Clara organize the cabin. They found evidence of Samuel's preparations everywhere. Fabric for curtains he'd never hung, seeds for a garden he'd never planted, even a half-finished cradle in the storage room. He was an optimist, Anna said gently, running her hand over the smooth wood. He was, Clara agreed, her throat tight. Sometimes I wonder if I can live up to what he expected. You stood up to Davenport. That's more than most would do. Standing up and surviving are two different things. Anna looked at her seriously. You're right. But at least if we don't survive, we'll fail as humans, not as cowards. The work continued through the afternoon, everyone settling into their roles. Clara found herself planning improvements, thinking about the ranch not just as Samuel's dream, but as something that could be hers too. She was discussing the possibility of expanding the garden with Anna when Patrick Brennan came running from the north pasture. Riders coming! 6 of them. Colton appeared from the barn, rifle in hand. Positions, everyone. Tom, take the barn loft. Sean, the side window. Patrick, cover the back. Anna, get inside with Clara. But Clara was already loading the shotgun. This is my land. I stand with you. The riders came slowly, deliberately, stopping just outside comfortable shooting range. Davenport led them, his black stallion prancing impatiently. Quite the little army you're building, Miss Whitfield, he called out. Tom Martinez, the Brennan boys, scraping the bottom of the barrel, aren't we? Good honest men are never the bottom of anything, Clara replied, stepping onto the porch. What do you want, Davenport? Just wanted to see how you're settling in. And to make you another offer, $15,000 for the ranch. That's more than generous for a property this size. The answer is still no. Davenport's smile faded. You know, your man Samuel thought he was untouchable too, right up until that flash flood swept him away. Funny thing about floods, they can happen even on clear days if someone knows how to redirect water. The confession hung in the air like gun smoke. Clara felt rage rise in her chest, hot and pure. You killed him, she said, her voice carrying across the yard. You murdered Samuel Morrison because he wouldn't sell. Prove it, Davenport said casually. Oh wait, you can't. The sheriff investigated, remember? Natural disaster, act of God, terrible tragedy. His eyes glittered with malice. This valley's seen a lot of terrible tragedies. Be a shame if there was another one. One of his men, a scarred individual with dead eyes, spoke up. Pretty little thing, even with the limp. Might be worth keeping her alive for a while, boss. Could be entertaining. Clara saw Colton's rifle swing toward the man, but she put her hand on the barrel, pushing it down. You're right, she told the scarred man. I am entertaining. Would you like to see how? Before anyone could react, she raised the shotgun and fired into the air. The blast spooked Davenport's horse, causing it to rear. Davenport, caught off guard, had to fight to stay mounted. That's one barrel, Clara said calmly, reloading in full view. The next one won't be aimed at the sky. Now get off my land before I decide you're trespassing rather than visiting. Davenport regained control of his horse, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life. No, Clara replied. My biggest mistake was thinking men like you might have a shred of decency. Now I know better. Whatever comes next, Mr. Davenport, remember that you started it. Samuel's blood is on your hands, and everyone here heard you all but confess to it. The word of a cripple and a bunch of failures against mine? Davenport laughed. Good luck with that in court. Who said anything about court? Colton spoke for the first time, his voice cold as winter wind. You just confessed to murdering my partner in front of witnesses. Out here, that's enough for justice. The threat hung between them, more effective than any gunshot. Davenport's men shifted nervously. They were hired guns, but there was something unsettling about facing people who had nothing left to lose. This isn't over, Davenport finally said. No, Clara agreed. It's just beginning. They watched the riders disappear into the distance, dust devils swirling in their wake. Only when they were completely out of sight did Clara lower the shotgun, her hands suddenly shaking. That was incredibly brave, Tom said. That was incredibly stupid, Colton corrected. But sometimes they're the same thing. That evening, they prepared for retaliation. Colton and Tom set up watch positions while the Brennan brothers reinforced the windows with thick planks. Anna made enough food to last several days, knowing they might be trapped inside. Clara cleaned every weapon on the property, her factory-trained hands comfortable with mechanical precision. They'll come tonight, Colton predicted. Davenport won't let that humiliation stand. Let them come, Sean Brennan said, surprising everyone with his vehemence. I'm tired of running, tired of hiding. At least here we make a stand. As darkness fell, they took their positions. Clara stationed herself at the front window, the shotgun ready. The moon was just a sliver, providing little light. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Every sound could herald an attack. The first sign of trouble was the smell of smoke, not from the chimney, but from the barn. Fire! Patrick yelled. It was a diversion. As Tom and Sean ran toward the barn with buckets of water, riders emerged from the darkness, firing at the cabin. Windows shattered, bullets splintering wood. Clara fired back, aiming for muzzle flashes, hearing someone cry out in pain. The chicken coop's burning too, Anna called from the back window. They were trying to burn them out, destroy the ranch piece by piece. Clara made a decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation. I'm going out there. Like hell you are, Colton growled, firing steadily at the attackers. They're destroying everything Samuel built. I won't let them. She grabbed a bucket of water and headed for the door before anyone could stop her. The yard was chaos. Flames leaped from the barn and chicken coop, casting dancing shadows everywhere. Bullets whined past Clara's head as she limped toward the barn, her legs screaming in protest. She threw water on the flames, knowing it was futile but needing to try. A rider bore down on her, and she recognized the scarred man from earlier. He was grinning, reaching for her, when Tom Martinez appeared from nowhere, swinging a shovel that caught the man in the face. He toppled from his horse, hitting the ground hard. Get back inside, Tom shouted at Clara. But she saw something that made her blood run cold, a line of fire leading from the barn to the cabin. They'd laid a trail of kerosene. Everyone out, she screamed. They're going to burn the cabin. The evacuation was chaotic, Anna helping Colton with his wooden leg that had been damaged by a bullet, the Brennan brothers firing desperately to cover their retreat. They made it to the root cellar just as the cabin erupted in flames. From their hiding spot, they watched their shelter burn. Clara felt tears on her cheeks, not just for the loss of property, but for the destruction of Samuel's dreams, his careful preparations for their life together. I'm sorry, she whispered to his memory. Don't be, Colton said grimly. We're alive, and some of them aren't. That's what matters. The attackers circled the burning buildings, whooping like wild animals. Clara counted 9 of them, including Davenport, who sat on his horse watching the destruction with satisfaction. Come on out, little cripple, he called. No point dying in a hole like rats. Clara started to stand, but Colton pulled her down. Wait. Listen. In the distance, growing closer, came the sound of many horses. Too many to be more of Davenport's men. What the hell? One of the attackers said. Into the firelight rode Sheriff Watson with a dozen men, all armed, all wearing hastily pinned badges. That's enough, Gideon, the sheriff said tiredly. You've had your fun. Since when do you care, Watson? Davenport snarled. Since the whole damn town decided they'd had enough. Father Miguel rang the church bells, called everyone to arms. These folks might be willing to live under your boot, but they won't stand by for murder. Clara could hardly believe it. The town had come to their defense. She saw Henderson among the deputies, his nervous hand steady on a rifle. Even Martha from the hotel was there, a pistol strapped to her hip. This is my business, Davenport insisted. Not anymore. The sheriff's voice held a strength Clara hadn't heard before. You're under arrest for arson and attempted murder. Your men too. Davenport laughed. You think you can take us? Look around, Gideon. You're outnumbered 3-1, and half your men are already thinking about running. It's over. There was a tense moment when violence seemed inevitable. Then one of Davenport's men threw down his gun. I'm not dying for a piece of land, he said. Others followed until only Davenport and 3 loyalists remained armed. This isn't over, Davenport said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Yes, it is, Clara said, emerging from the cellar. Her dress was ruined, her face streaked with soot and tears, but she stood tall despite her limp. You killed Samuel, you burned our homes, you tried to break us. But look around, Mr. Davenport. You failed. The town stood up, people found their courage, and you're the one who's broken. She walked closer, close enough to see the rage and disbelief in his eyes. Samuel was right. This land doesn't belong to men like you. It belongs to people willing to work it honestly, to build something worth passing on. You're just a thief who got caught. Davenport raised his gun toward her, but before he could fire, Colton's rifle cracked. The gun flew from Davenport's hand, and he clutched his bleeding fingers with a howl of pain. "Next one goes through your heart," Colton said calmly. The sheriff and his men moved in, disarming and restraining Davenport's gang. As they were led away, Davenport looked back at Clara with pure hatred. "You think you've won? This ranch will never prosper. You'll fail, just like every other fool who tries to fight the natural order of things." "Maybe," Clara admitted, "but I'll fail honestly, standing up rather than kneeling down." "That's more than you ever did." As the prisoners were taken away, the townsfolk turned to fighting the fires. It was too late for the cabin, but they saved part of the barn and kept the flames from spreading to the grasslands. Dawn found them all exhausted, covered in soot, surveying the damage. The cabin was gone, reduced to smoking ruins. The barn was half destroyed, the chicken coop completely lost. But they were alive, and more importantly, they were not alone. "We'll rebuild," Henderson said, speaking for the group. "The whole town will help. It's the least we can do after letting Davenport run wild for so long." "I can't pay," Clara said quietly. "Nobody's asking you to." Martha put her arm around Clara's shoulders. "You showed us what courage looks like. You reminded us that we're better than our fear. That's payment enough." Father Miguel stepped forward. "The church has some funds set aside for emergencies. This certainly qualifies. And I've got lumber from my old place," Tom Martinez added. "No use to me now, but perfect for rebuilding here." Clara looked around at these people, most of them strangers just days ago, now united in common purpose. This was what Samuel had loved about the valley. Not the land itself, but the potential for community, for something greater than individual survival. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you." Colton stood apart, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. Clara joined him, standing shoulder to shoulder in companionable silence. "Samuel would be proud," he finally said. "Of the town standing up? Of you. You did what he always hoped someone would. You broke Davenport's hold through sheer stubbornness and courage." "And a healthy dose of stupidity," Clara added. "That too." He turned to look at her. "You know this isn't over, right? Davenport has money for lawyers, influence in higher places. He'll likely walk free within a year. Then we have a year to make this ranch strong enough to withstand him." Clara squared her shoulders. "I'm not going anywhere, Colton. This is my home now." "Our home," he corrected. "Partners, remember?" She smiled, the first genuine smile since arriving in Redstone. "Partners." As the sun climbed higher, warming their faces, the work of rebuilding began. The Brennan brothers cleared debris while Tom and Anna salvaged what they could from the ruins. The townspeople organized into teams, some hauling lumber, others preparing food for the workers, still others standing guard in case any of Davenport's men remained at large. Clara worked alongside them, her limp more pronounced from the night's exertions, but her determination unwavering. Every salvaged nail, every cleared board, every small act of reconstruction felt like a victory against the forces that had tried to break them. By afternoon, the foundation for a new cabin was being laid. Nothing fancy, but solid and practical. Henderson had brought out a catalog from his store, showing Clara different options for windows and doors. "Might as well build it right," he said. "Something that will last." "Like Samuel intended," Clara agreed. As she looked through the catalog, a thought occurred to her. "Mr. Henderson, do you ever get pianos shipped out here?" He looked surprised. "Pianos? Well, it's possible, though expensive. Why?" "Just thinking about the future," Clara said, remembering Colton's story about Samuel's plans. "A ranch needs music, don't you think?" That evening, as the workers shared a communal meal among the construction, Sheriff Watson approached Clara privately. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "I let fear turn me into Davenport's puppet. If I'd done my job properly, Samuel might still be alive." Clara studied him, seeing genuine remorse in his weathered face. "We all make choices, Sheriff. The important thing is what we choose next. I choose to be better, he said firmly. This badge is going to mean something again, I promise you that. As night fell, Clara found herself sitting on the ruins of the porch, looking out at the valley. The mountains were purple in the twilight, and somewhere a coyote called to its pack. Despite everything, the loss, the violence, the uncertainty, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Ana Martinez sat down beside her, offering a cup of coffee. Penny, for your thoughts? I was thinking about broken things, Clara said. How sometimes they're stronger after they're mended than they were before they broke. Like bones, Anna agreed, or communities, or people. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. In the partially rebuilt barn, they could hear the men talking, planning tomorrow's work. It was a sound of normalcy, of life continuing despite tragedy. Can I ask you something? Anna said. When you stood up to Davenport, when you walked out into that firefight, weren't you terrified? Terrified, Clara confirmed. But I was more afraid of doing nothing, of letting fear make my choices for me. I did that for years after my accident, and all it brought me was a half-life in shadows. And now? Clara smiled in the darkness. Now I'm living fully, even if it kills me. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Claire was helping Tom Martinez salvage usable timber from the burned barn when she heard horses approaching. Her hand went instinctively to the rifle she now kept within reach at all times, but Colton called out from his watch position. It's Judge Garrison from the county seat. Got a military escort with him. Judge Garrison was a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same granite as the mountains, his face all sharp angles and deep lines. The 4 soldiers accompanying him were cavalry, their uniforms dusty, but their weapons well maintained. Miss Whitfield, the judge said, dismounting with surprising grace for a man of his years, I've come about the incident with Gideon Davenport. Clara's heart sank. Of course Davenport would have connections, would find a way to twist the law to his advantage. If you're here to release him, on the contrary, Judge Garrison interrupted, I'm here to take him to the county seat for a proper trial. The territorial governor has taken an interest in this case. Seems Davenport's been under investigation for some time. Claim jumping, extortion, suspected murder. Your situation simply provided the evidence we needed to act. Relief flooded through Clara so suddenly her damaged leg nearly buckled. Anna steadied her with a gentle hand. However, the judge continued, his tone becoming more serious, Davenport's lawyer is already making noise about irregularities in his arrest, about vigilante justice. I need statements from everyone involved, and Miss Whitfield, I need you to testify at the trial. When? 2 weeks. Can you make the journey? Clara thought about the 3-day ride to the county seat, the challenge it would present for her leg, the ranch that needed rebuilding. Then she thought about Samuel, swept away in a flood that wasn't natural, and her choice became clear. I'll be there. Judge Garrison nodded approvingly. Good. In the meantime, these soldiers will remain in Redstone to keep order. Davenport still has supporters, men who might try to intimidate witnesses. After taking statements from everyone, the judge departed, leaving 2 soldiers in town and 2 at the ranch. Their presence was reassuring, but Clara knew it was temporary. Eventually, they would have to stand on their own. The rebuilding continued with renewed energy. Word of the territorial governor's interest spread through Redstone, and suddenly, people who had been too frightened to oppose Davenport openly were volunteering their help. The new cabin was taking shape faster than Clara had dared hope. 3 days into the construction, another surprise arrived. A wagon approached from the east, driven by a small elderly woman with silver hair pinned in a severe bun. Beside her sat a younger woman, perhaps 25, with auburn hair and clever green eyes. I'm looking for Clara Whitfield, the elderly woman announced in a voice that brooked no nonsense. I'm Clara, she said, stepping forward despite her exhaustion from the morning's work. The woman studied her critically, taking in the soot-stained dress, the obvious limp, the calluses already forming on her hands from the rebuilding work. Then she smiled, and it transformed her stern face entirely. I'm Margaret Morrison, Samuel's aunt from Denver. This is my companion, Eleanor Reed. She climbed down from the wagon with Eleanor's assistance. I came as soon as I heard about everything. Clara felt tears threaten. Samuel had mentioned his aunt in his letters, always with deep affection. Mrs. Morrison, I'm so sorry about Samuel. None of that, Margaret interrupted, pulling Clara into a surprisingly strong embrace. Samuel wrote me about you, sent me copies of your letters. He loved you, child, and that's enough for me to love you too. The wagon, Clara discovered, was loaded with supplies, not just building materials, but furniture, kitchenware, even books. Samuel asked me to send these if anything happened to him, Margaret explained. He wanted to make sure you'd have what you needed to make a real home here. That evening, with the frame of the new cabin complete and the stars bright overhead, they gathered around a fire to hear Margaret's stories about Samuel's childhood. She painted a picture of a boy who'd always championed underdogs, who'd once fought 3 older boys to protect a limping dog, who'd spent his inheritance from his father not on himself, but on helping struggling neighbors keep their farms. He was too good for this world, Margaret said softly. But he believed this world could be better, and he was willing to fight for that belief. He found the right partner for that fight, Colton said, nodding toward Clara. Eleanor, who had been quiet most of the evening, suddenly spoke up. I'd like to help with that fight, if you'll have me. Everyone turned to look at her. She straightened under their scrutiny, her green eyes fierce. I'm a teacher by training, but I also know telegraphy and basic medical care. Redstone needs a school, and from what I've seen, it could use someone with medical knowledge too. She glanced at Margaret. Mrs. Morrison was planning to fund a school in Samuel's memory. I'd like to run it. Clara felt something shift in the air, a sense of possibility expanding. The ranch has enough land to build a schoolhouse, she said slowly, close enough to town for the children to reach, but far enough from the saloons to be respectable. And I could help with the teaching, Anna added excitedly. I taught the younger children in my village in Mexico before I married Tom. As they discussed plans for the school, Clara noticed Colton watching Eleanor with an expression she hadn't seen before, interest mixed with wariness, as if he recognized something in her that both attracted and worried him. The next morning brought less welcome news. One of the soldiers rode in from town with word that 3 of Davenport's men had escaped from the makeshift jail during the night. Including the scarred one, Jake Ferris, the soldier reported. He's Davenport's enforcer, mean as a rattlesnake and twice as dangerous. We're searching, but they know this country better than we do. The news cast a shadow over the construction work. Everyone moved a little more carefully, kept weapons a little closer. Clara found herself constantly checking the horizon, looking for riders who shouldn't be there. That afternoon, while helping Eleanor and Margaret organize the supplies they'd brought, Clara heard Buttercup neighing in distress from the pasture. She grabbed the rifle and moved as quickly as her leg allowed toward the sound. She found Jake Ferris trying to put a rope around Buttercup's neck, his scarred face twisted in an ugly grin when he saw her. Well, well, the limping bride. Thought I'd take your horse as payment for the face your friend gave me with that shovel. Clara raised the rifle, but her hands were shaking. Not from fear, she realized, but from rage. This man had been part of the group that burned the cabin, that tried to destroy everything Samuel had built. Step away from the horse, she said, her voice steadier than her hands. Jake laughed. You won't shoot. Good women like you never do. Too civilized, too weak. The shot surprised them both. Clara's aim was off. She'd meant to fire over his head as a warning, but the bullet caught his shoulder, spinning him around. He fell to the ground, clutching the wound and cursing. Colton and Tom came running, followed by the soldiers. They found Clara still holding the smoking rifle, staring at the wounded man with a mixture of shock and grim satisfaction. I shot him, she said unnecessarily. Good, Colton replied. Though next time, aim for center mass. More effective. As the soldiers took Jake Ferris into custody, properly secured this time, Clara found her hands finally steady. She'd crossed another line, moved further from the frightened factory girl she'd been, and closer to the frontier woman she was becoming. That evening, Margaret took her aside. You did what you had to do, the older woman said firmly. This land doesn't forgive weakness, and those men see kindness as something to exploit. Samuel would be proud of you for protecting what's yours. I'm not sure I recognize myself anymore, Clara admitted. A month ago, I'd never held a gun. Now I've shot a man. You're becoming who you need to be to survive here, Margaret said. That's not a bad thing, child. its evolution. The days fell into a rhythm: construction during daylight, guard shifts at night, planning for the future in between. The new cabin was smaller than the original, but better designed, with windows positioned for both light and defense, doors reinforced with iron brackets that Henderson donated from his store. Eleanor started teaching informal lessons to the local children under a large cottonwood tree, using books from Margaret's wagon. Clara often watched during breaks from construction, seeing how naturally Eleanor commanded respect despite her youth, how she adapted her teaching to each child's needs. "She's good," Clara commented to Colton one afternoon. "She is," he agreed, his eyes following Eleanor as she helped a struggling student. "Makes a man think about possibilities he'd given up on." Clara smiled. "Such as?" "Nothing," he said gruffly, but the tips of his ears turned red. "We've got bigger concerns than my foolish notions." Those concerns materialized 2 days before Clara was due to leave for the trial. A rider approached under a white flag. Not one of Davenport's men, but a stranger in an expensive suit that marked him as a lawyer. "Miss Whitfield? I'm Augustus Crane, Mr. Davenport's attorney. I've come with an offer." Clara didn't invite him to dismount. "I'm listening." "My client is prepared to pay you $50,000 for this ranch and your agreement not to testify at his trial. Additionally, he'll provide safe passage anywhere you'd like to go, San Francisco, Chicago, even back east." The amount was staggering, more money than Clara could have imagined. She could feel everyone watching her, waiting for her response. "Your client," she said carefully, "murdered Samuel Morrison. He burned my home, threatened my friends, and tried to kill me. And now he wants to buy my silence?" "He wants to buy peace," Crane corrected smoothly. "This trial will be ugly, Miss Whitfield. Your past will be examined. Your disability will be discussed in open court. Every mistake you've ever made will be fodder for public consumption. Is that really worth it?" Clara felt the old shame trying to surface, the voice that told her to hide, to take the money, and disappear. Then she looked at the people around her, Colton with his steady presence, Tom and Anna who'd risked everything to stand with her, Eleanor and Margaret who'd come to help build something from the ashes. "Mr. Crane," she said, "I worked in a factory where girls younger than Eleanor here lost fingers to machines because the owners wouldn't spend money on safety guards. I watched them pay off inspectors, silence families, bury reports. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to stand up to men like that, I would." She straightened her spine, ignoring the protest from her damaged leg. "Tell your client that I'll see him in court, and tell him that his money can't buy what was never for sale, my integrity." Crane's polished demeanor cracked slightly. "You're making a mistake. Davenport has resources you can't imagine, connections that reach high into the territorial government." "Then I'll need to reach higher," Clara replied. "Now get off my land before I decide you're trespassing rather than negotiating." As Crane rode away, Margaret Morrison clapped slowly. "Well said, my dear. Samuel definitely chose the right woman." The night before Clara's departure for the trial, they held a gathering at the ranch. The cabin wasn't finished, but it had walls and a roof, which was enough. Martha from the hotel brought a cake, Father Miguel said a blessing, and even Sheriff Watson attended, sober and seemingly committed to his redemption. "I want to thank you all," Clara said, standing with difficulty after the meal. "When I came here, I was alone and afraid. Now I have family." Her voice caught on the word. "You've given me more than help rebuilding a ranch. You've given me a community worth fighting for." "You gave us our courage back," Henderson replied. "That's worth more than any building." As the evening wound down, Colton pulled Clara aside. "I need to tell you something before you leave tomorrow." They walked to the spot where the original cabin had stood, now cleared and ready for a garden. The moon was full, casting everything in silver light. "I was jealous of Samuel," Colton said suddenly. "Not romantically," he added quickly at her surprised look, "but jealous of his hope, his ability to believe in good things. When he started writing to you, he became even more hopeful, more determined to make something beautiful here. I resented it because I'd given up on beauty after—" He gestured to his wooden leg. "And now?" Clara asked gently. Now I see what he saw. That broken things can still create beauty, still have purpose. He looked at her directly. You've taught me that, Clara. You and your stubborn refusal to let this place break you. We're teaching each other, Clara said. That's what partners do. The next morning, Clara set out for the county seat with an escort of soldiers, Margaret and Eleanor accompanying her for support. The 3-day journey was hard on her leg, each mile in the saddle adding to the ache, but she didn't complain. This was for Samuel, for the ranch, for the future they were building from the ashes of tragedy. The county seat was larger than Redstone, with brick buildings and actual sidewalks. The courthouse stood 3 stories tall, imposing with its columns and carved pediments. Clara felt very small as she climbed its steps, her limp more pronounced after the long ride. The trial was set to begin the next day, but that evening brought an unexpected visitor to Clara's hotel room. A distinguished gentleman with silver hair and kind eyes introduced himself as Governor William Patterson. Miss Whitfield, I wanted to meet you before tomorrow's proceedings, he said. Your situation has caught my attention for several reasons. Clara offered him the room's only chair while she sat on the bed, her leg grateful for the rest. I appreciate your interest, Governor, but I'm just trying to get justice for Samuel Morrison. You're doing more than that, the governor said. You're standing up to a system of intimidation that's plagued this territory for years. Men like Davenport operate in the shadows, controlling small towns through fear. Your courage in facing him publicly gives us the opportunity to shine light on these practices. I'm not trying to be a symbol, Governor. I just want to keep my ranch and honor Samuel's memory. Sometimes we become symbols whether we intend to or not, he replied. I want you to know that regardless of the trial's outcome, you have my support. The territory needs people like you, people willing to fight for what's right even when it's dangerous. After he left, Clara sat by the window looking out at the unfamiliar town. Tomorrow she would face Davenport in court, would have to relive the terror of the attack, would have her character and past dissected by hostile lawyers. But tonight, she had the governor's support and the knowledge that she wasn't fighting alone. Eleanor knocked and entered, carrying a tea tray. Thought you could use this, she said. Helps with nerves. How can you tell I'm nervous? You're rubbing your leg the same way my father used to rub his war wound before a storm. Eleanor poured the tea with practiced grace. You're going to do fine tomorrow. How can you be so sure? Because you've already faced worse than anything they can throw at you in that courtroom. You've been shot at, burned out, threatened, and you're still standing. Words from a lawyer seem pretty tame compared to that. The trial began at 9 o'clock sharp. The courtroom was packed, word having spread about the case that had attracted the governor's attention. Clara saw familiar faces from Redstone mixed with strangers, all eager to witness the drama. Davenport sat at the defendant's table looking confident despite his bandaged hand. His lawyer, Crane, had assembled an impressive array of documents and was already directing assistants like a general preparing for battle. The prosecutor, a young man named David Harper, who looked fresh from law school, seemed overwhelmed by comparison. Clara's heart sank. How could this inexperienced lawyer stand against Crane's obvious expertise? But Harper surprised everyone with his opening statement. His voice might have been young, but his words were precise, painting a picture of systematic terror that had gripped Redstone Valley for years. He listed names, dates, incidents, a catalog of violence that Davenport had orchestrated or condoned. When Clara was called to testify, she walked to the witness stand aware of every eye following her limping progress. Crane would use this, she knew, would try to paint her as weak, unreliable, hysterical. Harper's questions were straightforward, allowing Clara to tell her story simply. She described arriving in Redstone, learning of Samuel's death, Davenport's threats and offers, the attack on the ranch. Her voice remained steady even when describing the fire, the fear, the moment she'd thought they would all die. Then came Crane's cross-examination. Miss Whitfield, he began with false sympathy, that must have been terrifying for a woman in your condition. My condition? Your injury, your lameness. Surely it affects your perception, your ability to accurately observe and recall events? Clara felt anger rise but kept her voice level. My leg was damaged, Mr. Crane, not my mind or my memory. I saw what I saw, heard what I heard. But you were emotional, weren't you? You'd just learned of Mr. Morrison's death. You were alone in a strange place, frightened. I was grieving, Clara corrected, but grief doesn't make me a liar. Crane changed tactics, bringing up her past, the factory accident, suggesting she was seeking money, that she'd come to Redstone as a fortune hunter. Each insinuation cut, but Clara answered calmly, refusing to be baited.
"Isn't it true," Crane said, building to what he clearly thought was a decisive point, "that you shot my client's associate, Jake Ferris, without provocation?" "I shot him while he was stealing my horse after he'd participated in burning my home," Clara replied. "If that's without provocation, then we have different definitions of the word." A ripple of laughter went through the courtroom. Judge Garrison gavelled for order, but Clara caught what might have been approval in his stern expression. The trial continued for 3 days. Witnesses were called. Sheriff Watson admitting his failures, Tom Martinez describing the systematic harassment that had driven people from their homes, even Father Miguel testifying about the climate of fear Davenport had created. Eleanor proved particularly effective, her educated bearing and precise speech lending weight to her description of arriving to find the ranch in ashes, the town terrified, and Clara standing firm despite everything. "She could have taken Mr. Davenport's money and left," Eleanor said clearly. "Instead, she chose to stay and fight for justice. Not just for herself, but for everyone in Redstone who'd been too frightened to fight for themselves." On the final day, Davenport himself took the stand. Crane tried to paint him as a successful businessman persecuted by jealous rivals, but Harper's cross-examination was devastating. He produced documents showing property transfers made under suspicious circumstances, correspondence that hinted at violence, financial records that suggested bribery and extortion. "You said Samuel Morrison's death was an accident," Harper pressed. "A flash flood on a clear day. How do you explain that?" "Flash floods happen," Davenport said smoothly. "It's a dangerous country. So dangerous that 3 men died at the exact spot where you'd been trying to buy land. So dangerous that the only victims were men who'd refused to sell to you. Coincidence? Like it's a coincidence that every person who's opposed you has faced violence, arson, or death." Davenport's composure finally cracked. "This territory isn't for the weak," he snarled. "It belongs to men with vision, with the strength to take what they want and build empires. Not to crippled women and broken-down soldiers playing at being ranchers." The courtroom erupted. Judge Garrison gavelled repeatedly for order while Crane tried desperately to calm his client. But the damage was done. Davenport had revealed his true nature for all to see. In his closing argument, Harper stood directly in front of the jury. "Gentlemen, you have a choice. You can let Mr. Davenport continue his reign of terror, or you can stand with people like Clara Whitfield who refuse to bow to bullies. You can choose fear, or you can choose justice. The territory is watching. History is watching. What will you choose?" Crane's closing was technically perfect, highlighting inconsistencies in testimony, raising reasonable doubt, arguing that his client was being scapegoated for the harsh realities of frontier life. But his polished words seemed hollow after Davenport's outburst. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood solemnly. "We find the defendant, Gideon Davenport, guilty on all counts." The courtroom erupted again, this time in celebration. Clara felt Margaret's arms around her, heard Eleanor's delighted laugh, saw tears streaming down Anna's face. Justice, real justice, had been served. Judge Garrison sentenced Davenport to 20 years in territorial prison, with additional sentences for his associates. As Davenport was led away, he locked eyes with Clara one last time. She expected to see hatred, but instead saw something worse, disbelief. He truly couldn't understand how a crippled woman had brought him down. Outside the courthouse, Governor Patterson shook Clara's hand. "You've done the territory a great service, Miss Whitfield. If you ever need anything, you have only to ask." "Actually, Governor," Clara said, an idea forming, "there is something. Redstone needs a real school, a proper teacher. If the territory could help with funding." Patterson smiled. "Consider it done. Education is the foundation of civilization, after all." The journey back to Redstone was triumphant. Word of the verdict had already reached the town, and people lined the main street to welcome them home. Even those who'd been too frightened to help before now wanted to shake Clara's hand, to be part of the victory. But Clara's eyes were searching for one person.
She found Colton standing by the newly rebuilt cabin, a rare smile creasing his weathered face. "Welcome home, partner," he said simply. "It's good to be home," Clara replied, and meant it more than she'd ever meant anything. That evening, as the sun set over the valley, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Clara stood on her new porch surrounded by the people who'd become her family. The cabin still smelled of fresh lumber, the barn still needed work, and her leg ached from the long journey. But she was home, truly home, in a way the Pittsburgh factory row house had never been. "What now?" Eleanor asked, standing beside Colton, who was trying very hard not to look at her directly. "Now we build," Clara said. "We build the ranch Samuel dreamed of, the school Redstone needs, the community we all deserve." "That's a lot of building," Tom Martinez observed. "Good thing we have time," Clara replied. "And each other." As if in agreement, Buttercup whinnied from the corral. The sound echoed across the valley, carrying on the evening wind like a promise. They had survived Davenport, survived violence and fire and fear. Now came the harder task, building something worth preserving from the ashes of what was lost. Winter came early that year, the first snow falling just 2 weeks after the trial. Clara woke to find the world transformed, white and pristine, hiding the scars of violence under a blanket of innocent snow. She stood at her window, coffee warming her hands, watching Colton and Tom working to reinforce the barn roof against the weight of accumulating snow. Eleanor emerged from the small room they'd added to the cabin for her, her auburn hair braided practically for the day's teaching. The schoolhouse was still being built, but she'd refused to wait, conducting classes in the main room of the cabin when weather permitted. 15 children enrolled as of yesterday, Eleanor announced, pouring her own coffee. The Johnson family is sending their 3 boys in from their homestead 10 miles out. That's a long way to travel for schooling, Clara observed. Education is hope, Eleanor replied simply. Parents will travel any distance to give their children a better future than they had. Margaret Morrison, who had extended her stay indefinitely, looked up from her knitting. Speaking of the future, we need to discuss the spring plans. The cattle need to be bred, the garden expanded, and there's still the matter of the silver deposits Davenport mentioned. Clara had been thinking about those deposits. Part of her wanted to investigate, to see if there really was wealth beneath their land. But Samuel's words, relayed through Colton, echoed in her mind. Mining turns men into monsters. We're a ranch, she said firmly. Cattle, horses, maybe some crops. That's enough. A knock at the door interrupted the conversation. Clara opened it to find Sheriff Watson standing in the snow, his hat in his hands despite the cold. Miss Whitfield, we have a problem. 3 families got burned out last night. The Andersons, the Kowalskis, and the new Chinese family that just settled near the creek. Clara's blood ran cold. Davenport's men? That's just it. We don't know. Could be his remaining supporters, could be something else. But folks are scared talking about leaving town before worse happens. Clara grabbed her coat and rifle. Show me. The ride to the burned homesteads was grim. The snow couldn't hide the devastation. 3 small farms reduced to smoking ruins, families huddled in wagons with whatever they'd managed to save. The Chinese family, the Changs, had lost everything including Mr. Chang's elderly mother, who hadn't made it out in time. Clara dismounted despite the protest from her leg, approaching Mrs. Chang, who held her 2 young children close. The woman flinched when Clara reached out to her. I'm sorry, Clara said, knowing the words were inadequate. We'll find who did this. Find. Mr. Chang's English was accented but clear. We know who. Men who say this valley for white people only. Men who say Chinese bring bad luck, take jobs. His voice broke. My mother came here for freedom. She died in smoke, like an old country. Clara felt rage building in her chest. They'd fought so hard to free Redstone from Davenport's tyranny, only to discover other poisons lurking beneath the surface. You'll stay at the ranch, she said, the decision instant and firm. All 3 families. We have the barn loft and can make room in the cabin. It's warm, defensible, and no one will dare attack there. We cannot impose, Mrs. Anderson began. It's not an imposition. It's what neighbors do. Clara looked at each family.
We stand together or we fall separately. That's the choice. The logistics were challenging. 17 extra people in spaces meant for 5 stretched everything thin.
But Margaret organized with military efficiency. Eleanor turned lessons into games to keep the children occupied, and Anna worked miracles with limited food supplies. That evening, as they all crowded around makeshift tables for dinner, Clara noticed something beautiful happening. The Kowalski boy was teaching the Chang children a Polish folk song. Mrs. Anderson was helping Anna with tortillas. Margaret was speaking German with Mr. Kowalski, delighted to practice the language of her grandmother. "This is what Redstone could be," Eleanor said quietly beside Clara. "All these different people, different stories, making something new together." But the harmony was shattered near midnight by the sound of horses approaching fast. Clara grabbed the rifle, Colton took position at a window, and Tom herded the families into the safest corner of the cabin. "Clara Whitfield!" The voice was unfamiliar, harsh with authority. "Come out and face justice." Clara peered through the window. 12 riders, all wearing makeshift masks, torches casting dancing shadows across the snow. She didn't recognize the voice, but she recognized the type. Men who appointed themselves judge and jury when the law didn't move fast enough in their preferred direction. "Justice for what?" she called back. "For harboring undesirables, for polluting our valley with foreign trash. Come out, or we'll burn you out like the others." Before Clara could respond, Mr. Chang moved past her toward the door. "No," he said firmly. "No more running. No more hiding." He looked at Clara. "You stand for us. We stand for you." Mr. Kowalski joined him, then Mr. Anderson, even the older Brennan brothers. They weren't fighters, most didn't even have weapons, but they stood ready to defend the place that had offered them shelter. Clara opened the door and stepped onto the porch, her rifle visible but not raised. "You want to burn out families in the dead of winter? Kill grandmothers in their sleep? And you call that justice?" "We call it keeping our valley pure," the lead rider shouted. "These people don't belong here." "And who decides that?" Clara's voice carried across the snow-covered yard. "You? Men so cowardly you hide behind masks?" "We're the concerned citizens of Redstone. You're criminals," Clara interrupted. "Arsonists and murderers. Take off those masks if you're so proud of your cause." There was shifting among the riders, uncertainty creeping in. They'd expected fear, not defiance. They'd expected to find the immigrants isolated, not protected by established residents. "Last warning," the leader said, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. "Send them out, or—" The shot came from behind the riders. One of the torches went flying, and a familiar voice rang out, "Or you'll deal with us." Sheriff Watson emerged from the darkness, accompanied by Father Miguel, Henderson, Martha, and what looked like half the town, all armed, all looking grimly determined. "Thought you might try something like this," Watson said, his rifle trained on the masked leader. "So we organized our own concerned citizens group. Funny thing, we're concerned about families being burned out of their homes." "You're protecting foreigners over your own kind?" the leader sputtered. "I'm protecting innocent people from cowards and thugs," Watson replied. "Now, you boys have a choice. Drop those masks and face proper arrest, or ride out now and never come back. But know this, we'll be watching. Any more fires, any more attacks, and we won't bother with arrests." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Claire could feel the families behind her holding their breath, could see Colton's finger on his trigger, ready to fire if needed. Finally, the masked riders began backing away. "This isn't over," the leader warned. "Yes, it is." Father Miguel stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of moral certainty. "I know who you are, Thomas Briggs, even with that mask. And you, Carl Henley, and you, James Powell. I've heard your confessions, baptized your children. But if you continue down this path, you'll find no sanctuary in my church, or any other." The threat of social and spiritual exile did what weapons couldn't. The masks came off, revealing faces Clara recognized. Not hardened criminals, but shopkeepers, ranch hands, ordinary men who'd let fear and hatred twist them into something ugly. "We just wanted to protect our town," Thomas Briggs said, his voice now plaintive rather than threatening. "Then protect it from real threats," Clara said. "From poverty, ignorance, lawlessness.
not from families seeking the same dreams you are. The riders dispersed, heads down, their torches extinguished in the snow. The townspeople remained until they were sure the threat had passed, then approached the cabin. "Thank you," Clara said to Watson, to all of them. "We meant what we said after the trial," Henderson replied. "We stand together now, all of us." Martha looked at the crowded cabin, the faces peering out windows. "Though you might need more space. I've got empty rooms at the hotel, no charge for families in need." Others offered similar help, spare rooms, barn lofts. Even Henrik Larsson offered his old homestead cabin that had stood empty since his wife died. By dawn, all three families had better accommodations arranged, and plans were being made to rebuild their homes come spring. As the helpers dispersed, Eleanor approached Clara with a strange expression. "Thomas Briggs' daughter is one of my students, one of my best, actually. How do I face her knowing what her father tried to do?" "You teach her to be better than him," Clara said simply. "That's all any of us can do. Be better than who we were yesterday." The winter deepened, bringing challenges that had nothing to do with human malice. A blizzard trapped them in the cabin for 3 days, the snow piling higher than the windows. The cattle needed constant tending to keep them from freezing. Clara's leg ached constantly in the cold, sometimes so badly she could barely walk. It was during one such bad spell, when she was struggling to make it from her bed to the main room, that Colton finally addressed what they'd all been thinking. "You need to see a real doctor about that leg," he said bluntly. "It's getting worse, not better." "There's no doctor within 50 miles, Clara pointed out. "There's one in Denver," Margaret interjected, "a specialist who worked with war injuries. He might be able to help." Clara wanted to refuse, to insist she was fine, but the pain shooting up her leg made the lie impossible. "After spring thaw, the ranch needs me here now." "The ranch needs you healthy," Colton countered. "We can manage for a few weeks." But there was no more discussion of doctors after the next morning brought new crisis. Tom Martinez burst into the cabin before sunrise, his face grim. "Rustlers hit the Henderson place last night, took 30 head of cattle, and shot Randy Henderson when he tried to stop them." "Is he alive?" Clara asked, already reaching for her coat. "Barely. Lost a lot of blood. Martha's with him, doing what she can, but—" Tom shook his head. They rode to town immediately, Clara gritting her teeth against the pain in her leg. They found Henderson's store closed. A crowd gathered outside. Inside, Randy Henderson lay on a cot, his face gray as ash, his breathing labored. His father knelt beside him, looking suddenly ancient. Martha looked up as they entered. "The bullet's still in him. I can't get it out without killing him, but if it stays, then I'll get it out." Eleanor's voice was steady as she pushed through the crowd. "I helped my father with his medical practice before he died. I've removed bullets before." "You're a teacher," someone protested. "I'm whatever this town needs me to be," Eleanor replied, already rolling up her sleeves. "Now clear out, all of you except Martha. I need boiling water, clean cloths, and whiskey. Lots of whiskey." For the next 2 hours, Eleanor worked with steady hands and fierce concentration while Martha assisted. Clara organized the crowd outside, sending riders to track the rustlers, others to check on vulnerable ranches. When Eleanor finally emerged, blood on her apron but relief in her eyes, a cheer went up. "He'll live," she announced. "Weak for a while, but he'll live." Colton, who'd been pacing like a caged animal, suddenly crossed to Eleanor and kissed her soundly in front of everyone. The crowd fell silent in shock, then erupted in whoops and applause. Eleanor, red-faced but smiling, looked up at him. "What was that for?" "For being extraordinary," he said simply. "And because I'm tired of pretending I don't love you." "Well then," Eleanor said, her composure returning, "I suppose I should mention I love you too, wooden leg and all. Iron will and all," he countered, and kissed her again. The moment of joy was brief. The riders returned with news that the rustlers had headed into the Badlands, territory too dangerous to follow in winter. Worse, they'd left a message carved into a tree. "This valley belongs to those strong enough to take it." "It's starting again," Henderson said wearily. "Different faces, same greed." "No," Clara said firmly. "It's not the same because we're not the same. We're organized now, united. They're testing us, seeing if we'll fold. We won't." She looked around at the gathered townspeople, the established families and the newcomers, the Americans and immigrants,
all united by shared danger and common purpose. We need a militia, she continued, not vigilantes, but a proper defense force. Sheriff Watson can deputize volunteers and we'll train together, patrol together, make it clear that Redstone protects its own. Who will lead it? Watson asked. I'm sheriff, but I'm no military commander. Colton was a sergeant in the Union Army, Claire said. He knows tactics, defense. If he's willing. Colton nodded slowly. I'm willing, but it won't be easy. Turning farmers and shopkeepers into a fighting force takes time. Then we'd better start, Claire replied. The Redstone Militia, as it came to be known, began training the next week. Men and women both, anyone over 16 who could handle a weapon. Clara participated despite her leg, learning to shoot from horseback, to reload quickly, to think tactically. The Chang family surprised everyone when Mr. Chang revealed he'd been a soldier in China before immigrating. He taught hand-to-hand combat techniques none of them had seen before, movements that used an opponent's strength against them. In my country, we say the bamboo bends but does not break, he explained. Flexibility is strength. 2 weeks into the training, they got to test their new skills. The rustlers struck again, this time at the Kowalski farm, but the militia was ready. A coordinated response trapped the rustlers between two forces, and after a brief firefight, 6 men were captured, including their leader, a hired gun named Blackjack Kelly, who'd ridden with various outlaw gangs throughout the territory. You think you've won something? Kelly sneered as they tied him up. There's always more like us. Always someone willing to take what you've built. Maybe, Clara agreed, but now there's also us, people willing to fight for what we've built. And we're not going anywhere. The capture of Kelly's gang marked a turning point. Word spread that Redstone had teeth, that it wasn't an easy target anymore. The winter passed with no more major incidents, though everyone remained watchful. Spring arrived like a blessing, melting snow revealing green grass, wildflowers beginning to dot the meadows. Clara stood in the garden she and Anna had planned, watching the first shoots push through the dark soil. Her leg had been particularly bad that morning, but she refused to let it stop her from enjoying this moment of renewal. It's time, Margaret said, joining her. Time for you to see that doctor in Denver. Clara wanted to protest, but the words died as her leg buckled, sending her to her knees in the freshly turned earth. Colton and Eleanor, now officially engaged, rushed to help her up. No more arguments, Colton said firmly. You're going to Denver if I have to tie you to a horse. The ranch will be fine, Eleanor interrupted. We've all learned to work together over the winter. A few weeks without, you won't see us fall apart. Clara looked around at the ranch she'd fought so hard to save, the community she'd helped build from fear and ashes. Samuel's dream had become reality, but different from what either of them had imagined. It wasn't just a ranch anymore. It was a symbol of what people could accomplish when they stood together. All right, she conceded, but I'm coming back. This is my home. Of course you're coming back, Anna said, hugging her. Where else would you go? You're stuck with us now. As Clara prepared for the journey to Denver, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was an ending of sorts. The first chapter of her life in Redstone, marked by violence, struggle, and constant crisis, was closing. But what came next? That evening, her last before departing, the entire town gathered at the ranch. Tables were set up in the yard, lanterns strung between posts, musicians playing as children danced. The Chang children performed a traditional dragon dance they'd been practicing. The Kowalski family sang Polish folk songs. The Brennan brothers told Irish tales that made everyone laugh. Henderson stood up, tapping his glass for attention. A toast, he said, to Clara Whitfield, who came here a stranger and became our conscience, our courage, and our friend. To Clara, the crowd echoed, but Clara raised her own glass. To Samuel Morrison, she said, her voice carrying across the gathering, who believed in this valley's potential for goodness, and to all of you who proved him right. As the party continued around her, Clara found herself standing apart for a moment, looking up at the stars that Samuel had once watched from this very spot. She touched the locket at her throat, the one Colton had given her that first day, containing Samuel's photograph. We did it, she whispered. Not the way we planned, but we did it. A warm wind stirred her hair, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Tomorrow she would leave for Denver, would face whatever the doctor could or couldn't do for her leg. But tonight, surrounded by the family she'd found in the most unlikely place, Clara felt whole in a way she never had before the accident that had started her on this journey. "Ready to go inside?" Colton asked, appearing at her elbow with Eleanor. "In a moment," Clara said. "I want to remember this. All of it." They stood together, watching their community celebrate under the vast western sky. The ranch that had nearly been destroyed was thriving. The town that had cowered under tyranny had found its strength. And Clara herself, the limping factory girl who'd traveled 2,000 miles for a love that existed only in letters, had found something even more valuable: a purpose, a place, and people worth fighting for. Eleanor squeezed her hand. "It's not an ending, you know. Denver, the doctor, it's just another chapter." "I know," Clara said, "but this chapter, this winter, we all survived together. This was the one that mattered most." As if in agreement, a wolf howled in the distant mountains, wild and free. The sound no longer frightened Clara. Like her, the wolf was part of this landscape now, shaped by its hardships and strengthened by its challenges. Tomorrow would bring new trials, new tests. The rustlers might return, other Davenports might emerge, her leg might never improve. But tonight, Clara stood on her own land, surrounded by her chosen family, victorious in ways she'd never imagined possible. The limping mail-order bride had become something else entirely: a rancher, a fighter, a leader. Most importantly, she'd become herself, fully and unapologetically, in a place that had taught her that broken things could be the strongest of all. The music played on, and Clara finally let Colton and Eleanor lead her back to the celebration. Her leg protested every step, but she danced anyway, spinning under the stars with her friends, her family, her home. In the morning, she would leave for Denver, but part of her would always remain here, in this valley that had tested her and found her worthy, with these people who'd stood beside her when standing seemed impossible. The stagecoach to Denver left at dawn, with Margaret Morrison insisting on accompanying Clara despite protests that she could manage alone. As Redstone disappeared behind them, Clara gripped the seat to steady herself against the vehicle's lurching motion, each bump sending sharp pains through her damaged leg. "Tell me about this doctor," Clara said, trying to distract herself from the discomfort. "Dr. William Thornton," Margaret replied. "He served as a field surgeon during the war, specializing in traumatic injuries. He's developed new techniques for dealing with damaged nerves and muscles. If anyone can help you, it's him." The journey took 4 days, each one testing Clara's endurance. By the time Denver's buildings appeared on the horizon, she could barely stand, having to lean heavily on Margaret to exit the coach. Dr. Thornton's office occupied the second floor of a modern brick building. Clara struggled up the stairs, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool spring air. The doctor himself was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 40, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Miss Whitfield," he said after a thorough examination that left Clara exhausted and humiliated, "the damage is extensive. The original break healed poorly, and you've been compensating in ways that have caused additional problems. The muscles have atrophied, the nerves are compromised, and there's significant scar tissue." "Can you help?" Clara asked directly. "Possibly. There's a surgical procedure I've been developing. It would involve re-breaking the bone to set it properly, then extensive rehabilitation. The process would be painful, take months, and there's no guarantee of success. You might end up worse than you are now." Clara thought of the ranch, of all the people depending on her. What are the odds? Perhaps 50% chance of significant improvement, 30% of no change, 20% of increased disability. When would you operate? "You're considering it." Dr. Thornton seemed surprised. "Most patients refuse when they hear the risks." "Doctor, I've been shot at, burned out, and threatened by outlaws. A 50% chance sounds better than most odds I've faced lately." He smiled slightly. "Then we could operate tomorrow, if you're certain." That evening, in the boarding house Margaret had arranged, Clara wrote letters to everyone back in Redstone. To Colton and Eleanor, asking them to manage the ranch. To Anna and Tom, thanking them for their friendship. To the families who'd taken shelter with them, encouraging them to stay strong. The longest letter was to Samuel, though she'd never send it. She wrote it in her journal, telling him about everything that had happened, about the community that had grown from the ashes of tragedy. "I'm scared," she wrote, "not of the pain, but of losing even the limited mobility I have. But you believed I was brave, so I'm trying to be. I'm trying to be the woman you saw in those letters, the one who could build something beautiful in hard soil." The surgery was scheduled for early morning. Margaret held Clara's hand as Dr. Thornton prepared the chloroform. "Samuel would be proud of you," she said, "for having surgery, for never stopping, never accepting limitations as permanent." Margaret's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You've become the daughter I never had, Clara. Whatever happens, remember that." The chloroform took her under, and Clara dreamed of wildflowers in a high meadow, of Samuel's voice singing hymns, of a cabin that never burned, of dancing without pain under infinite stars. She woke to agony. Her leg felt like it was being torn apart from the inside, waves of pain that made her previous discomfort seem like nothing. Dr. Thornton was there immediately with laudanum, but Clara pushed it away. "I need to know," she gasped. "Did it work?" "The surgery went well," he said carefully, "but we won't know the full results for weeks, possibly months. The bone is reset, the scar tissue removed, but now comes the harder part, teaching your body to work properly again." The rehabilitation was torture disguised as therapy. Every day, Dr. Thornton's assistant, a stern woman named Mrs. Hartley, put Clara through exercises that left her sobbing with pain and frustration, stretching muscles that had shortened, strengthening what had atrophied, retraining nerves that had forgotten their proper function. "I can't," Clara gasped one particularly bad day, 3 weeks into the therapy. "Can't never built a ranch or fought off outlaws," Mrs. Hartley replied unsympathetically. "Your friends in Redstone wrote about you. They said you were the strongest woman they knew. Prove them right." Margaret had been forwarding letters from home. Eleanor wrote about the school's progress, 40 students now and growing. Colton sent terse updates about the ranch, cattle prices, fence repairs, a new foal from Buttercup. The townspeople sent encouragement, drawings from the children, pressed flowers from Anna. But it was a letter from Mr. Chang that gave Clara the strength to continue. "You stood for us when we had nothing," he wrote in careful English. "Now we stand for you. The ranch is strong. The town is safe. Take time to heal. We guard your home until you return." 6 weeks after the surgery, Clara took her first step without holding on to anything. It was shaky, painful, but it was a real step. Weight properly distributed, leg functioning as it should. Dr. Thornton actually smiled. "Remarkable progress. Most patients take months to reach this point." "Most patients don't have a ranch to get back to," Claire replied, taking another careful step. By the 8th week, she could walk the length of the therapy room. By the 10th, she could manage stairs. The limp was still there, would always be there to some degree, but it was markedly improved. More importantly, the constant pain had diminished to an occasional ache. "You're ready," Dr. Thornton announced after 12 weeks. "The rest of the healing will happen through normal activity. You've done remarkably well, Miss Whitfield." "Thank you," Clara said, testing her newly functional leg. "What do I owe you?" "The bill has been paid," he said, seeming embarrassed. "A bank draft from Redstone signed by what appears to be half the town. The note said, 'For our Clara, who taught us to stand tall.'" Clara had to sit down, overwhelmed by the gesture. These people, many of them struggling themselves, had pooled their resources for her medical care. The journey back to Redstone felt different. Clara still favored her left leg, still moved carefully, but the grinding agony was gone. She could sit a horse properly, could stand for more than minutes at a time, could walk without wanting to weep. As the stagecoach crested the final ridge, Clara saw something that made her heart race. The valley spread below, but it was transformed. Where individual scattered ranches had been, she now saw connections, roads properly cut, fences that marked cooperation rather than isolation. And rising beside her ranch, exactly as planned, stood a proper schoolhouse, its bell tower reaching toward the sky. The entire town had turned out to welcome her home. As the coach stopped, Clara stepped down on her own, standing straight and walking forward with only the slightest limp. The cheer that went up could probably be heard in the next valley. Colton was there first, his own awkward gait quickening as he approached. "Welcome home, partner. The leg? Better?" "Not perfect, but better." She looked around at all the faces, the original residents and the newcomers, all mingled together. The ranch? See for yourself. They'd improved everything. The barn was fully rebuilt and expanded. The cabin had a proper porch with a railing she could use for support if needed. The garden was thriving, and in the pasture, cattle grazed peacefully alongside several new horses. "How did you afford all this?" Clara asked. Eleanor stepped forward, radiant in a simple white dress. "We found something while digging the foundation for the school. Not silver, something better." She led Clara to a spot behind the new schoolhouse where a natural spring bubbled up from the rocks, the water crystal clear and cold. "It's mineral water," Eleanor explained. "The same kind they bottle and sell in fancy Eastern spas. A geologist passing through confirmed it. This water has healing properties. We've already had offers from distributors." Clara knelt carefully by the spring, cupping the water in her hands. It tasted of minerals and mountains, of the earth's deep secrets. Samuel always said this land would provide if we treated it right. "That's not all," Anna said, pulling Clara toward the cabin. "We have another surprise." Inside, in the corner of the main room, stood a piano. It was old, scarred from its journey, but when Clara pressed a key, the note rang true. "How?" she whispered. "Found it in Denver when we went to sell the first batch of mineral water," Tom explained. Seemed like something the ranch needed. Clara sat at the bench, her hands trembling as they found position on the keys. It had been years since she'd played, before the accident when her mother was still alive. The melody that emerged was rusty but recognizable. "Amazing Grace," one of the hymns Samuel had loved. As she played, voices joined in, the whole community singing together in the cabin that had been rebuilt from ashes. Through the window, Claire could see the cemetery on the hill where they'd moved Samuel's remains, marked now with a proper headstone that read, "Samuel Morrison, dreamer, rancher, beloved." That evening, after the celebration had wound down and only the core group remained, they sat on the porch planning the future. The mineral water would provide steady income. The school was attracting families from throughout the valley. The militia had evolved into a proper cooperative defense agreement between all the ranches. "There's something else," Colton said, seeming nervous. "Eleanor and I want to get married. Here, at the ranch, if you're agreeable." "Agreeable?" Clara laughed. "I'd be honored." "When?" "Saturday," Eleanor said. "We didn't want to wait any longer. Life's taught us that tomorrow isn't guaranteed." The wedding preparations consumed the next few days. The whole town pitched in. Martha and Anna cooking, the children gathering wildflowers, Father Miguel preparing his finest sermon. Clara played piano for the ceremony, her fingers finding their skill again as Eleanor walked down an aisle made of garden roses. As Colton and Eleanor exchanged vows, Clara thought about the strange paths that had brought them all here. A one-legged soldier, an educated woman fleeing Eastern constraints, immigrant families seeking hope, and herself, a factory girl with a ruined leg who'd answered a lonely rancher's advertisement. "Do you take this woman?" Father Miguel asked Colton. "Every broken piece of her, as she takes every broken piece of me," Colton replied, making Eleanor laugh through her tears. After the ceremony, as the party moved into full swing, Sheriff Watson approached Clara with a serious expression. "We've had word from the territorial capital." Gideon Davenport escaped during a prison transfer. He killed 2 guards. The music seemed to dim, the laughter suddenly forced. Clara felt the old fear trying to resurface. "When?" 3 weeks ago. He could be anywhere by now." Clara looked around at the celebrating crowd, at families who'd rebuilt after being burned out, at couples dancing despite injuries and hardships, at children playing without fear. "Then we'll be ready if he comes. We're not the same people he terrorized before." "No," Watson agreed. "We're not. The whole valley's different now, thanks to you." "Thanks to all of us," Clara corrected. But Davenport's escape cast a shadow over the following weeks. Guards were posted, weapons kept close, children watched carefully. The mineral water business was starting to thrive, with regular shipments to Denver and even talks of distribution to San Francisco. The school had hired a second teacher to help Eleanor. The ranch was profitable for the first time since Samuel's death. It was too good to last. The attack came at dawn on a Tuesday, almost 3 months after Clara's return. She woke to Buttercup's frightened neighing and the smell of smoke. Through her window, she could see figures moving in the pre-dawn darkness, torches being lit. "Positions!" Colton's voice rang out. The militia training paid off as everyone moved to predetermined defensive spots. Clara grabbed the rifle, her improved leg allowing her to move faster than ever before. She reached the window in time to see Davenport himself, older and harder, his time in prison having carved away any pretense of civilization. "Clara Whitfield," he called, "you cost me everything. Now I'll return the favor." There were at least 20 men with him, all armed, all looking desperate enough to do anything. But as Clara watched, lights appeared on the surrounding ridges, signal fires the militia had prepared. "You're surrounded, Davenport," Sheriff Watson's voice echoed from the north. "The whole valley's armed and ready." It was true. The cooperative defense agreement meant that an attack on one ranch brought everyone. Riders were converging from all directions, the thunder of hooves growing louder. Davenport's men began to look nervous, but he laughed. "You think your farmers and shopkeepers scare me? I've got professional killers here." "And we've got something you don't," Clara called from the window. "We've got everything to lose and the will to defend it." The battle, when it came, was fierce but brief. Davenport's men, realizing they were vastly outnumbered, began surrendering or fleeing almost immediately. But Davenport himself charged the cabin, shooting wildly, screaming about revenge and justice. Clara stepped onto the porch to meet him, rifle raised. Her leg held steady, no trembling, no weakness. She was not the limping bride who'd arrived in Redstone all those months ago. "You should have taken the money and run," Davenport snarled, his gun swinging toward her. "And you should have learned that some things can't be bought or bullied," Clara replied. They fired simultaneously. Clara felt the bullet tear through her shoulder, spinning her around. But her shot was true. Davenport clutched his chest, looking surprised, then fell forward into the dust of the yard. As Clara collapsed, her blood soaking into the porch Samuel had built, she heard voices. Colton calling for Eleanor's medical skills, Anna praying in Spanish, Tom organizing the capture of fleeing outlaws. But loudest of all was the sound of the school bell ringing, calling the community together as it had been designed to do. Eleanor worked on Clara's shoulder with the same steady hands that had saved Randy Henderson. "You'll be fine," she said, though her face was pale. "The bullet went through clean." Davenport? Dead. "It's over, Clara. Really over this time." As the laudanum took effect, Clara drifted in and out of consciousness. She saw faces, the Chang children peeking around their mother's skirts, the Kowalski family praying in Polish, the Brennan brothers standing guard with rifles. Her family, her community, her home. When she woke properly, it was evening. Her shoulder was bandaged, her arm in a sling, but she was alive. Through the window, she could see people still in the yard, cleaning up the battle's aftermath. 14 of Davenport's men captured, 6 fled, 4 dead, including him, Colton reported. Our side. Injuries but no deaths. The militia system worked perfectly. The ranch? Minor damage already being repaired. The mineral spring is intact, the school undamaged. We survived. Margaret entered carrying soup. The territorial governor is sending federal marshals to take the prisoners. He's also recommending Redstone for official incorporation as a town, with a proper charter and everything. Mayor Whitfield, Eleanor teased gently. It has a ring to it. But Clara shook her head. I'm a rancher, not a politician. Let someone else be mayor. I've got cattle to tend and water to bottle and a piano to play. Over the following weeks, as Clara recovered, Redstone transformed again. The battle with Davenport's gang was the last major violence the valley would see. Families felt safe to settle. Businesses opened. The Mineral Water Company officially incorporated with shares distributed among all the founding families. The Chang family opened a restaurant that became famous throughout the territory for its fusion of Chinese and Mexican cuisine. The Kowalskis started a brewery using the mineral water. The Brennan brothers founded a freight company to transport goods to and from Denver. And at the center of it all, the Morrison Ranch stood as a symbol of what determination and community could accomplish. The schoolhouse bell rang each morning, calling children to learn. The mineral spring bubbled up endlessly, providing wealth that was shared rather than hoarded. The piano in the main cabin was played every evening, sometimes by Clara, sometimes by the children she was teaching. One evening, as autumn painted the valley in shades of gold and crimson, Clara stood where the original cabin had burned. Her shoulder still ached from the wound. Her leg still carried its limp, but she stood tall. Eleanor joined her, visibly pregnant now, with her and Colton's first child. "Any regrets?" she asked. "About what?" "Coming here. Everything you've been through. You could have had a quiet life somewhere else." Clara thought about the question, about the factory in Pittsburgh, about the girl she'd been who'd hidden her injury and accepted limitations as permanent. "No regrets. This place, these people, they've made me who I was meant to be." "Samuel would be so proud," Eleanor said softly. "I hope so, though the ranch is nothing like what he planned." "It's better," Colton said, joining them with his awkward gait. He dreamed of a simple ranch. "You've built a community." As the sun set behind the mountains, casting the valley in purple shadows, Clara heard the sound of horses approaching. Sheriff Watson led a group of riders, all wearing federal marshal badges. "Miss Whitfield," the lead marshal said, tipping his hat, "I'm Marshal James Crawford. We're here to establish a permanent federal presence in Redstone. The governor feels this town is too important to leave unprotected." "Important?" Clara asked. "You've created something unique here," Crawford explained. "A town where immigrants and natives work together, where justice actually means something, where people stand up for what's right. The territory needs more places like this." That night, the town celebrated again, but it was different from the desperate parties after surviving violence. This was a celebration of achievement, of building something lasting. Clara played piano while children danced, their parents, American, Mexican, Chinese, Polish, Irish, all mingling freely. "Play Amazing Grace," someone called out. As Clara's fingers found the familiar hymn, she thought about the words, about being lost and then found, about being blind and then seeing. She'd been lost when she arrived in Redstone, blind to her own strength. But through fire and lead, through pain and triumph, she'd found herself. The music rose into the night sky, voices joining in multiple languages, the words different, but the melody the same. On the hill, Samuel's grave caught the moonlight, and Clara could almost feel his presence, his approval of what his dream had become. "Thank you," she whispered to his memory, "for believing in me before I believed in myself."